But that's what I want to do to other people. I want to just say, hey, get out and make something. And don't make the thing that you think you're supposed to make. Make the thing that you actually want to make. And that is actually really hard for people.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Frankman. And on today's episode, I'm interviewing my friend David Perell. David is an internet writer and the founder of the online writing course, Rite of Passage. And in today's episode, we talk about how David is redefining not just what education on the internet can look like, but education in general. We talk about how he draws inspiration from things like visual art and EDM concerts to inspire how he crafts an online education experience. We talk about what keeps students coming back to Rite of Passage cohort after cohort. And we talk about some of the biggest lessons that David's learned along the way crafting this course, which he started in 2019 and which has at this point served thousands of students from around the globe. This was a particularly interesting conversation for me because I took Rite of Passage in one of the very first cohorts. So I've gotten to see the evolution of this course over the years. And I had a great time interviewing David and reflecting on his experience. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation. David, I'm so excited to be having this conversation. This feels very full circle.
Full circle.
I met you in 2019. I found your Twitter. I don't know if I've ever told you this. I found your Twitter in, I think, January of 2019. So right when you were starting Rite of Passage.
Yep.
And I was obsessively reading your tweets. I was like, this guy's awesome. I have to be his friend. And then I took Rite of Passage in the fall of 2019.
Third
so
cohort
3.
Yep.
And it's crazy. You were like recording out of your bedroom, weren't you, in New York or out of your apartment?
Yep. I remember my third apartment in New York. I had my desk right next to my bed, and it was so close that I had to like literally go sideways in order to get into bed. And then my fourth apartment was a huge upgrade because my desk was on the other side of my room, and I thought I'd made it. I was like, I have a commute of like 4 footsteps to my desk now. Woo!
I mean, in New York, that's kind of a big deal.
It is, yeah.
And now we're here in your studio in Austin, which is amazing. It's been so cool to see this come together. It's so cool to be in here having this conversation now. And it's been so cool to watch how much Rite of Passage has grown too, because when I took it in cohort 3, I thought it was a great course, but I see what you guys have built now, and it's the production quality of what you've built is incredible.
Thank you.
It's a really, I feel like you keep resetting the bar of what online education is supposed to be. And you've built such a, I feel like you keep redefining what online education is supposed to be too. And it's been interesting to talk to you throughout your journey as well, because I feel like you keep redefining your hypotheses of what a good education on the internet is supposed to be, how to deliver a good education. And I want to talk about that a little bit because I'm curious. It's been a while since I've asked you. I'm curious like what your working hypothesis is currently for what makes a great online course.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of components to that. And I think you have to think about life. I think in a good online course. So let's just do a separation here. I'm not really interested in pre-recorded courses of video content, stuff like that. So everything I'm about to say just doesn't apply to that. What I'm really interested in is cohort-based courses, live experiences where people come together. And I think that there's a few things. I think that the fundamental word that I always come back to is life. How do you create things that have life? And we try to get there with high energy in our live sessions. I'm obsessed with having the slides that we make and different things that we produce almost feel artistic. I think that we're just getting started there. And I have a lot of inspiration that I pull from electronic music, especially the live shows. And then a lot that I pull from like Thomas Cole paintings and like Impressionism. And I'm really interested in how you balance sort of the futuristic with the classical and what that looks like. Because I think that we need to rebrand the future. And, you know, I think there's a museum of the future in Dubai. And I watched a YouTube video about it. And it is very flat, feels a little sterile to me, white walls, and it's very technocratic. You know, like the future is made by technologists. And I think that what does it look like if the future is sort of thought about from the perspective of designers and musicians and different artists? And how do you inject heart and soul and life into the future? And I think that that's a lot of what we're trying to do, is think about how can a digital experience be better than an in-person one. So I'll give you an example. So I gave a talk at an in-person conference last week, about 45 people in the room, and we tried to go into basically the equivalent of breakout rooms, which you can easily do on Zoom. And we're in the room and everyone starts talking. It's all of a sudden so loud. It's so loud in there, people can't even hear each other. And then I'm like, hold on, there are so many things that are suboptimal from this. Okay, we have 45 people in the room. Well, the chances that you're just so happen to be sitting next to the best person in the room for you to be talking to, well, very low, right? So if you had an algorithm, well, then you could instantly pair people. If I try to get people to say, hey, you just spoke to person one, now go talk to 2 and 3, we literally have to move around the room, change the chairs. It's all noisy, the click clacks of all the chairs going. On Zoom, we can just change things. And there's so many little efficiency gains that you can get on Zoom. And so I think that a lot of people look at online education, especially after COVID, they were like, oh, this doesn't work. All the old hoagies, like, doesn't work, doesn't work. These are all the ways that it's worse than in person. And of course, it's worse than in person in a lot of ways. Just like a car in a lot of ways is worse than a horse, right? Like, yes, but also there's certain things that are awesome about transporting on horses and certain things great about cars versus bicycles. Like, every technology has a different way that you can extend it and a different place that you can push. And the world just doesn't really see how much you can push with online education. And I'm really excited about creating those experiences.
What are the biggest things that most people are missing about how far you can push education online?
Well, online education is a show. Like, it's a full show.
Especially yours.
Like, it is a show. And what I mean by that is it's like a play, right? It's the difference between a lecture and a play, right? If you go talk to Mrs. Johnson, who's like some college professor, and you say, hey, Mrs. Johnson, like, how did you prepare this? She'll probably say, hey, I prepped a lesson plan the night before I came in, and then I was sort of I got to do some grading and all that. Oh, I'm exhausted. I don't have any help. I got to do all the grading. I got to do all the lesson plans. I mean, teachers are exhausted. They have so much work to do. Mm-hmm. Then every single time that they run a semester, they're not getting really good feedback. They don't have speaking coaches who they're working with. If you talk to professors at most schools about, do they actually read the end of semester essays or the end of semester reflections and reviews, a lot of those really aren't about how to improve the course. They're really for budgeting. There are all these bureaucratic reasons why they do those. That's not how we think of it at all. We have someone who is dedicated and focused on curriculum. After every single live session, we meet for an hour. We critique everything that I say. How did I present it? What was the story? What felt too long? Where did I ramble? What was fun? What was good energy? How was the exercise? We literally have basically secret shoppers who come in and then they tell us how every single breakout room is, every single exercise was. We have data on where do students get stuck? Why do they get stuck? And then when we do our post-cohort review, I just got a 27-page document of quantitative and qualitative data that I'm going to review this weekend. We're already starting to think about our next cohort. How do we improve? How do we improve? How do we improve? And all this to say, if you think about a play, everything is basically baked in and rehearsed because you're spending all that time. And so the thing is, when you're in person, you don't have that team because you don't have the scale. And then you can't be as focused as much on the second to second like we can with online education. And I say show both because density of information really, really matters. Entertainment value matters because the screen, it's so easy to get distracted when you're on your computer. And also, I want to describe things in the best possible way. I want to tell a story and do live sessions that move you emotionally and that hit you intellectually in a way that is enjoyable in the present. And then also the ideas stick with you over time. And there's fundamental frameworks and philosophies that actually become part of your worldview. People always joke that Rite of Passage isn't a course, it's an entire universe, it's an entire world. And we're very intentional about cultivating that. We want to create sort of this grand experience with all of these nooks and crannies that you can traverse through. It's almost like creating like a Tolkien fantasy universe in online education. And think about what that does for the relationships amongst people who've been through the experience. And, we've had And one of our students, she goes by the pen name of Charlie Bleeker. She just went through the course for the 8th time. We have people who come back and come back. And I get excited about that.
Can you talk about that? The people that come back again and again, what is the recurring value? Because they're doing a lot of the same exercises over and over. Why do they say they keep coming back?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the gym, right? There are people who go to SoulCycle year after year. They know what the music's going to be. They know what the instructor's going to say. But there's something about the feel and the energy and the intensity. I was talking to one of our students, and he was like, all year I struggle to write, and then rite of passage comes around. The energy, the intensity, I just go for it. And it's the same thing, when you're working out. If you go to a gym and you just try to ride the bike for 45 minutes, you're not going to get as much as a really good SoulCycle class with an instructor that you love. And that's why people come back.
It's the CrossFit effect. You're not going to do something really hard on your own, but when there's the peer pressure and the accountability and the energy and the momentum of having all these people doing it with you, all of a sudden this really hard thing becomes fun.
Yeah.
What about, you talked a little bit about the distraction thing, and I want to know more about how you think about that, because I think that's one of the biggest things that people run into with designing online education experiences is you can have another tab open and be doing something else. You're getting the text coming in on your phone. You can turn off your camera. Nobody's seeing that you're distracted. So the sort of accountability factor of an in-person course or event is missing. And so you have to overcome that by doing more to build a community experience, which you've done a phenomenal job of. Like, the energy is palpable to the point of feeling like you're in the room with other people when you're on a rite of passage call. But how have you thought about designing that experience in a way that holds people's attention?
It's got to be awesome. It's got to be awesome. It has to be awesome. And that's why, people say, hey, David, you went 20 seconds too long on this. And I'm like, yeah, I did. That's not good. That's not good. I mean, we have, I have a little speaker note right there. Speak like you're speaking for the first time. When I'm telling a story for 5th or 6th time, I need to enunciate and have the energy that I speak with when I'm saying something for the first time, right? So much of what makes somebody talking fun to listen to is you get a sense that they're having the epiphany in the moment, and that's what's hard, my friend Reza Jaffrey, he did a comedy show, a special in Austin. And I went up to him after. I was like, how many times had you rehearsed the average joke? And he said 1,000. 1,000 times he had rehearsed the average joke. You'd have no idea. But he has a way of speaking as if he's speaking for the first time. And I want to do the same thing when I teach. And so you got to make it awesome. And I think that one of the things that I think a lot about, in terms of what are my fundamental things that I'm doing in my day-to-day, I think one of my biggest things is just really being conscious about cultivating taste along certain dimensions. I would say that is one of my fundamental job descriptions, which is cultivating really good taste in people. How do I identify virtuous, high-quality people and understand them well in a short amount of time, right? Anyone can get to know somebody over 40 years, to exaggerate this, right? But how do you get to know somebody really well within 20 or 30 minutes? And I've met certain people who are incredibly good at this and, trying to figure out what's going on there. Then I just, my budget for shows, for a really good show, is unlimited budget. I will, 2 weeks ago, I flew to New York City, clear across the country for one and a half hour show, just because it was an artist who I admired who was doing a marginally better show that he could only pull off at this venue. And I'm like, I have to be there. And really thinking deeply about when you like something, trying to analyze what are the dimensions that I really like that thing on, and then basically abstracting that into principles. And then getting really into the weeds, super analytical, left-brained, but then also having the capacity to just zoom out and just have a very intuitive sense of awareness of just being like, no, this isn't good. I don't like this. I just learned that at Stripe, they have a saying, is it actually good? But is it actually good? And, it's really easy in an organization or just in your own creative work to just say, you know what, this is fine. And the quality bar falls. Somebody who leads the organization, they make something so everybody else is sort of a yes man and they're just like, yeah, that's good. And no, you always have to ask, is it actually good? Is it actually good? And it drives people nuts. Like, this is one of the things that I think people get a little annoyed with me for, is like, I will just look at something and I'll just be like, I'm not excited about this. I'm not inspired by this. And I know that something's off. And I feel that instantly. I know how excited I get when I'm excited about a person, when I'm excited about a show, when I'm excited about an idea. I mean, my entire world lights up, right? It's like that, baby, you light up my world like nobody else. Like, it's like that I feel that.
Yeah.
And when I'm not feeling that, something's off. And then I have to take that intuitive awareness, understanding, that epiphany, and then I have to basically break it down and say, what's going on? And it usually takes me a few days.
What else? Because your role has changed so much as the curator and custodian of this. I don't know what words you use to describe how you think about your role, but when I met you, it was just you building this, and you had an assistant, I think, and then you had Will, and that was it. And you were building this course. I forget how many people were in cohort 3, but it was a lot of people, and you were running the whole thing yourself. And now you have a whole team of people under you, and it's been really cool to watch how your role has become more and more defined and refined. And it feels like in a lot of ways you're doing less and less, but just at a much greater scale. What are the things, like, as you're thinking about curating this experience, and you clearly have this very defined vision around what a great rite of passage experience ought to be, what a great online course ought to be. What are the things that you do, and what are the things that, like, how do you define you doing your job well to facilitate everyone else working with you being able to also deliver a fantastic experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing that you just realize is that if you can find the right person and just specify a good scope of work, they can do that thing way better than you could ever be able to. So when we have a guy named Michael Dean who runs our curriculum, he's just going to do a better job, both because the way his brain works, his obsession with the specific ideas, and he can devote a full-time work to something that for me would just be part of what I do, right? And he loves it. Then Will, who designs the student experience, like, his taste, like, I always say that Will has the best macro empathy of anyone I've ever met. And I think that there's micro empathy and macro empathy. So micro empathy is like, you and I are together. How well can I pick up on what you're facing, what you're struggling with? Can I put myself in your shoes? And that's one thing. But what Will's really good at doing is he can put himself in the shoes of 250 people at the same time and intuitively grasp what they need, what they don't need, what they like, what they won't like no one I've ever seen. So Will, on that axis, on that dimension, is so much better than me. So Will had emailed me. He sent 7-10 bullet points of, hey, here's some ways to improve the course. I was like, great, I'll pay you, and just implement it. So, when I work with people, I give them a bunch of autonomy. I say, once they're in the door, high trust, and I say, run with it. And what I'll do is I'll set a very high level vision of what I want. I'm good at abstracting things down into principles. We have ways of working at rite of passage. We have core mottos, core philosophies. I will do that. I'm good at setting the big picture vision. And I'm also happy to give feedback. But the actual day-to-day work, if I can give that to somebody who's way better than me, then I should totally do that. And I take no pride whatsoever in, I need to do all the things myself. Actually, that was one of the big lessons that I learned from the show in New York. It was Madeon and the architects. And he has this team of 5 or 6 people. They're called the architects. They help him with art direction and all the things that he's doing. And of course, rite of passage is sort of a lot of my vision, but there's so many people inside of it who they're just better at all the individual things than that I am. And I say, let's do it, of course.
I need you to talk more about this show since you brought it up a couple of times. Tell me about it. What was it?
I mean, so I just think there's really 2 people. There's Madeon and there's Porter Robinson.
I don't know who either of these people are.
Okay, so
context.
Yeah, so they're these 2 electronic music artists.
Okay.
And I think that what's really interesting is I think their albums, Porter's albums are like good. Madeon's aren't that great. But their live shows are incredible. Like, I will fly to anywhere in the world to watch one of these live shows. And I think that live shows have that choreography, just that intensity of stimulus of like just all of these different pieces of motion. And I think like for Madeon, what I love about him is he was trained as a as a magician. And he takes a lot of principles from magic, and through lighting and sound and motion, he will sort of trick the eye. And I'm just like standing there. I'm like, wow, I have to watch this. And it's so compelling. It's so captivating. And it's the same. And then Porter Robinson, it's funny, they're really good friends going back to when they were 12, 13 years old, does something very similar with his live shows, which are an autobiography through sound.
Oh, wow.
And basically, he had this show called Worlds in 2015, which basically shows a lot of his childhood, a lot of what he went through, being really obsessed with video games, struggling with certain existential questions like, if there's 7 billion people on this planet, how will I ever find the woman who is perfect for me? And like, you know, he says, though I'll never know your name, I cry for you the same. And he uses visual and sonic art to basically tell that story. And I don't know, it's just something about that genre. You know, Marshall McLuhan, going back to the 60s, always used to say that artists are the antenna of society. And they're basically these early motion detectors. And what they do is they sort of venture out and they play with new technology, and they sort of show the rest of society where the world is going, where culture is going. And now I think it's both artists and technologists, right? Chris Dixon says that what the geeks are doing now, everybody else will be doing in 10 years. But I think that it's important to find people in whatever way resonates with you who are those early warning systems, those early warning detectors for the antenna for the rest of society. And if you just follow them, they'll just tell you where the world is going.
So when you say that you need to go to shows like this as part of your process, your own creative process, what are you gleaning from something like this and bringing back here?
Yeah, I mean, look at this space, right? Like this space is
awesome.
Thank you.
I love it so much.
I mean, this space is sort of like, I always try to say, like, how can I be maximalist without being busy? And how can I sort of express myself in a very dense way? I think minimalism is mostly very poorly done. And I also think that Apple sort of won minimalism, and now we're like, it's time for a change. And so I think a lot about how do they keep people captivated? What is the rhythm? What is the flow of a show? And then how do I apply that to a live session? And it's a very intuitive sense. But I think that from really studying live shows, I have a sense for the rhythm and the pacing of things. And I've always just said, I went to a Porter Robinson show in 2015, and I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And I just want to do this for education. And I'm going to spend 20 to 30 years doing that. And that's what I do, you know?
What are the edges of that you're exploring now? Like, you've pulled quite a bit into what you're doing already, but you're always innovating. You're always building. Like you said, you just came out of another cohort. What are the things that you're excited to play with more?
Yeah. So I think that every single time that you have randomness, you're leaving opportunity on the table. I don't like randomness. I really don't like randomness. I like curating experiences. Like, if I'm hosting a dinner party, I am a moderator. I am leading the conversation. It's like a Michelin star chef, right? A 3 Michelin star restaurant. They are obsessed with everything from like the texture of the door handle to the way that the host or the hostess greets you, to then how you get walked to your table. What is the feeling of the couch that you sit on? How is the food delivered? How is it presented? What is the temperature? Is there smoke coming out? What is the texture? How do the different textures of food play with each other if you're doing omakase, right? Like, there's a whole cadence and an experience that's delivered in the food. And I was talking to a guy, Patrick O'Shaughnessy, runs a big podcast called Invest Like the Best. And he was talking about this idea called hyper casual, that we're moving towards hyper casual, which is like, oh yeah, it's cool. Like, don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, worry about everything. Worry about everything. And like, if you are creating your experience, like, make it great, make it exceptional, make it intentional, and obsess over it. And I feel like early in my career, I really valued 80-20, and now I value 20-80. Like, what is the 80% of the work that I can do to get the last 20%? Because on the internet, everything's a power law. And so the best things get so much more benefit and attention and make more money than than the things that are below that, right? It's like all power laws. It's just returns to scale all the way down. And so I'm always thinking, to go back to this point about randomness, like every single thing about randomness is us being hyper casual, us basically saying, oh, you know what, we're just not going to worry about that. No, like if we're doing breakout rooms, I want to have algorithms that match people for different breakout rooms. So for example, if you have a course that has 350, 400 people, right? I always think of it like a light cone. Right at the beginning, everyone's written 0 articles. Everybody is having the same experience of like, okay, we're just getting started here. So people are in a very similar place. Towards the end of the course, you have people who've written 5 articles. They're like, oh my God, Rite of Passage has totally changed me. I'm a totally different person than I was a month ago. And you have other people who are like, this month ended up being really hard. I didn't get much from it. I'm still working on my first piece. Well, you got to match the people who are still working on their first piece, match those people with the obsessives. And there's nothing worse when you're in an experience and you're falling behind and then you're with someone who's crushing it, or you're crushing it, you're with somebody who's falling behind and you're like, you almost get this like drain of energy. And so it's funny, many years ago, OkCupid, they basically came out with 3 questions to judge if 2 people would be good in a relationship. One of them was like, would you chuck it all and go live on a sailboat for a year? The other one was like, do like horror movies? And there was some other question, right? And somehow these like 3 questions that seemingly have nothing to do with dating at all correlate extremely highly with 2 people's propensity to do well in a relationship together. I want to know, what's the equivalent for friendships and Rite of Passage? What's the equivalent for people who write really well? What questions can we ask when you come in, you do an onboarding survey that are super easy to answer, don't take a lot of work, that then have extremely high leverage so that we can take that and then we can curate your experience to make it so much better. And so what I want to do is like, hire a really good data scientist who can basically get into the Zoom API and then know how to match people in breakout rooms at an exceptionally high level. And that is like one very, 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 very tiny thing inside of Rite of Passage that we are so far away from doing better. And just my imagination is just like, we have to do that better.
And yet it's such a fundamentally valuable thing to add to the course because, I mean, everybody who has gone through Rite of Passage at any point in time says this, and this was true of my experience too. I still have friends that I met in 2019 taking cohort 3 who were awesome and who I still go visit and we catch up regularly and they've introduced me to their networks. It was such a valuable experience from a social standpoint, but it also felt a little random. Like we just happened to be in a breakout room at one point and just happened to talk about something interesting and just happened to exchange contact information. And there are so many other people that I probably missed because we didn't have overlap. And I feel like that's true for a lot of social engagements in general. Like you go to a party and you may or may not actually talk to the most interesting person in the room. You're, on Twitter and you may or may not actually ever find the people who share your niche interest about this specific thing. And so if you can solve for that, that gives you such a leverage point as a kind of a linchpin of the internet too. Like you're the person then that people go to because they know they're going to meet somebody really interesting and really valuable to them, which I feel like you've already done in a lot of ways. Like you've carved out a niche in the internet. The types of people who come through Rite of Passage are often high ambition, high potential. They're often working on really cool things. The list of alumni who've come through, who've gone on to build really amazing brands for themselves is extremely lengthy. And so you've done this very interesting thing where you're learning about the thing that you're passionate about, which is education, but at the same time, you're carving out this niche as being like, you're the connector of all the other people who are also interested in these things, which is a very powerful and valuable position to be in.
Yeah.
And so it makes a lot of sense that these are the types of questions that you're asking that just make you more and more adept at that. Because I feel like that's something you're naturally very good at to begin with.
Which is connecting?
Yeah, being like positioning yourself as the connector.
Yeah, I really value that. And it's something that just comes extremely naturally to me.
What about, there's also a branding element to all of this because a lot of this was just built off of your personal brand. You spent a lot of time talking on Twitter. At least this was my experience watching you do this. I don't know if you would agree, but you spent a lot of time on Twitter talking about the things you were interested in. You were writing a lot. Then you started teaching people how to write. People were naturally kind of flowing in because they were also interested in things that you were interested in. But I've watched the brand get more and more deliberately constructed around rite of passage. It feels in a lot of ways like there's the David brand and then there's a rite of passage brand, and they feel separate. They have a different aesthetic, a different ethos. And I've never asked you about this, but I've been curious for a while what the logic is that's driving the rite of passage brand development specifically, because it's clearly working. It's attracting the right types of people. But I want to know more about how you've thought about the elements of it, the components of it.
Yeah. So I think there's a few things. I think that, so I take a lot of inspiration from Paul Graham, where Paul Graham did a lot of writing. He became a connector for so many people. He had a bunch of ideas that he pioneered. I mean, geez, how much of culture is things that have come, at least Silicon Valley cultures, is things that have come from Paul Graham. Make your schedule, manage your schedule, do things that don't scale, focus on the customer. I mean, there's just so many things. That's sort of Bezos, but YC has or talk to your customers, very, very YC. And what's interesting is those principles are sort of embedded in his baby of YC, but he was able to sort of have the interaction with YC that he wants to have. And I think that one of the challenges with building an online course is when you get started, everything depends on you. Everything hinges on you. And that was really stressful and difficult for me. Like I was like, when I started, I used to just work so hard that I would just get sick as we were selling rite of passage, as we were doing rite of passage, and the cohort would end. And I literally felt like I was being released from a prison of my own creation. And I mean, I'm glad I did that because it got us here, but it was so much work. And it was like that pressure was really unenjoyable. And so what we're just trying to do is build the seeds so that rite of passage could have its own brand. And look, there's been struggles with that. I think in a lot of ways, over the short term, just selling from my own personal brand is a lot easier. And we've actually come back to that a little bit. But we want rite of passage to have its own distinct brand in the way that YC and Paul Graham are distinct. But also they're always going to be connected at the hip. I mean, rite of passage is the ultimate distillation of what I believe in, what I stand for, but I want rite of passage to have a life of its own, because sort of like what we were talking about earlier, there's so many things required when you're delivering an experience, running a business, teaching a group of people, and I'm only the best at a very small fraction of those things. And the intersection of what I'm very good at and what I enjoy is small. And so anything that's outside of that, I want other people to really take a leadership position on.
What about the brand elements of rite of passage, like the color, the aesthetic, like all of those types of things? How deliberate was all of that? And what was the logic behind it?
Yeah. So first of all, I think we're just getting started. Just getting started. I mean, what I really want to do is, well, actually, here, let's do this. So this studio was a way to basically do that. So this studio basically is a collection of just all my favorite things in the world. This is a statue of Nike from the Louvre, which is my favorite thing that I saw there. My favorite albums over there. I have Herb Ryman's Disneyland map that he and Walt drew as they were thinking through the original conception of Disney. And this studio was a way to basically make legible what my aesthetic, the energy, what I care for, what I stand for. And then now we're trying to take this and basically bring it over to a digital form factor. And there's certain things that come easily, right? Like there are, like the colors are pretty easy to port over, the fonts are pretty easy to port over, but there's certain things that are difficult. There's certain things that when you're in a tactile place, they work really well. But then once you get on a small two-dimensional screen, the tactile elements don't work as well. This is why so many fonts are moving from serif to sans serif all around the world, right? If you look at fashion logos, they've become so homogenized. Burberry and Valentino, like so many of these logos are just really bland now. And I think that the digital world has a way of making a lot of aesthetics very vanilla. And I'm trying to basically push against that, counter that, and really just trying to say, how do we take the things from this studio and then bring them into a digital space? But one of the things, that you might not know, that like we're very intentional even about the colors. So whenever you're in Rite of Passage, we have a color for when you're going to actually do something. Now that it's your time to start talking, it's a red. It's sort of like a maroon type thing. Then if we're delivering a presentation, it is purple. And so there's so much that's happening subliminally in that through a brand and through an aesthetic, so that you can just look at the color and say, okay, now we're going to go here. And I just think we're getting started with that. And I think this is another reason why I go see shows, because I can watch shows develop over many years, which gives me inspiration to know that in the ways that I'm building something and I just have the seed of an idea, I have seen other things become like a beautiful tree. And I now know what that process looks like and the cadence of how that can happen.
This is a very fundamental question, but I don't think I've ever asked you this directly. Why education? Why is that the thing you care about?
Because school sucks.
You're preaching to the choir.
I mean, it just like, it really, really, really sucks for people who are self-driven and have a lot of energy and who actually care about learning. Dare I say, actually care about learning. School kind of sucks. And I really didn't like it. And it felt very unjust that I needed to sit in a classroom for so many years. And it was very clear to me after doing that for so many years what it could actually look like to do it right. And so it's fun to work on this. It's meaningful to work on this. It's important to work on this. And there's so many ways to use the internet to deliver an experience at a quality, at a scale, at a price point that isn't possible with traditional schools.
Do you see a roadmap from working on a course for adults about writing to working? Because what you're talking about with your inspiration is writing or teaching rather with kids, education for kids. Do you see, like, it sounds like everything that you're talking about translates. I mean, in my mind, it very clearly maps onto everything else.
Right.
But do you see a path for you where you want to address other elements of education too after you get this delivering a writing course on the internet thing right?
Yeah. I think that'll be another chapter. But, we tried to launch a high school program and it just didn't work. There wasn't demand for it, and sort of learned the hard way that the world isn't quite ready for that yet. And
Why is it not ready?
I think parents are very, very, very risk averse with their kids. And I think that the sentiment around online education is still pretty negative. And kids are busy. They're in public schools all day. They're sort of sitting in classrooms. And I think that what it's going to go to is you basically go to some place and then you're going to have an option of just hundreds of different programs that you can plug into. Mm-hmm. And that's just a little further away than I want it to be.
I feel like COVID was both a step forward and a step back with online education, the perception of online education, because everybody brought school home during the pandemic and they had Zoom school. And it really shifted the Overton window of what people are comfortable with. Like, it's not weird anymore to talk about homeschooling and online education. It feels like there's been a huge shift. But I also feel like it set the bar so low for what a Zoom classroom looks like that I think it also negatively impacted people's perception of taking a class online. Yeah.
I mean, I have a hilarious screenshot of a friend at a Ivy League university, and the professor just cannot figure out Zoom, and he has that like infinity window, like a Yayoi Kusama like mirror room, and it just like goes on in perpetuity. And you just look at this, and it's just this professor in his 70s who clearly can't figure out Zoom, and you're just like, okay, no, if this is what people think online education is, no wonder they don't like it. But this is how the future always is, right? There's certain parts of the future that sort of are way ahead. The world takes a while to catch up, and this is standard stuff.
Oh yeah, no, I'm very bullish on online education in the long term, which we've talked about extensively before. I think that we're just getting started. We haven't even scratched the surface as a society around what online education can look like. But the things that are working are very powerful. They're working very well. And there are a bunch of different schools for both kids and adults that are doing amazing things with online education, yours obviously being one of them. And I think it's just a matter of, it's just like a normalization kind of thing and an exposure thing where people have to see that these are working. They have to hear the case studies. They have to hear the testimonials. Do you have other thought, like what shifts in your mind the perception of online education to make people ready for your course for teen? Like if you were too soon, what makes it, like when do you think it will be time, or what do you think needs to happen in order for people to be ready for what you were building?
Yeah. I think there's a few things. I think movies about it, I think will really change it. A movie that normalizes it is always a big thing. I think another generation, right? It's sort of like, the Planck principle.
No.
So it's basically that science progresses one funeral at a time. And so scientists don't change their minds. It's just that the old scientists die and the new ones come in, and that's how science progresses. And I think that there's something there with education, right? So now you got the homeschoolers, and then people who are homeschool will then say, hey, maybe my kid should be homeschooled. They'll tell their friends about it. And then you sort of just get this slow increase rather than, hey, I was raised in a very traditional school and now I'm not going to do online education. There's no way. That's too much of a big risk. And then also just success stories, right? Like you have clearly, if you look at the discourse, like there's been enough successful people who've gone to Montessori schools that people who are even pretty risk averse are like, oh, Montessori will work because I know a bunch of successful entrepreneurs who've done that. But we haven't gotten there with online education. But Maria Montessori was doing her work in like 1920s and 30s. It takes some time, but better not take that long because the system really has got to change. And there's certain principles that I think are really important too. I like the heuristic that doing is better than listening. Like we have just way too much consumption, sit back, passive consumption. And so this is actually the thing. Like I actually am very excited about Wall-E-ifying education in certain ways. You're sitting back in this crazy entertainment room and you're just getting an amazing experience. But, so I want to make your consumption experience way better, but have way less of the consumption. And so the problem is like the consumption that we have in the current schools isn't nearly immersive enough and there's way too much of it. I'd rather have way less of it and make it way more immersive. I went to the Van Gogh exhibit. It was like this sort of moving art installation. There's this one room you sort of lie down on beanbags and sort of through the flow of Van Gogh's art, you can really come to understand his life. And it's just mesmerizing. I mean, it is absolutely beautiful. And I think that what is going to be able to be delivered in people's homes and schools in terms of getting live streamed amazing consumption experience is going to be incredible. But doing is better than listening. We have to get people doing stuff way more. I often think of the word creative when the sort of standard way that we think about creative is that creativity is basically some combination of intelligence and openness to experience. And actually, that's fairly biological. So it's very hard to sort of shift your creativity. It is true that if you do certain psychedelic experiences, it does seem like you move one standard deviation over in terms of more openness to experience. So there's little tweaks that you can have, but creativity is quite biological. And that's sort of like, I can't really do much to change that. But there's another almost definition of the word creative that I would really like to introduce and get people thinking about, which is your propensity to create something. And what I mean by that is like, are you just sitting back and reading, sitting back and just watching a movie, a TV show, and just sitting there and consuming the experience? Or are you consuming things in order to create something? And it's funny, like if you watch kids, I think our natural inhibition is just to create things, but something about the modern world has made us very consumption oriented and has taken us away from being creative. Once again, propensity to create. And I think one thing that we just need to get people doing is just whenever you are consuming something, thinking through what kind of creativity is this going to lead to? Because it makes the idea stickier. It really improves your sense of taste. And it makes you much more discerning in terms of valuing what information is of quality, what's signal, what's noise, and what matters to me, what doesn't matter to me. And I think it's just, we need to get people more creative in the sense that they are constantly creating things more often.
Where did that come from for you? Was that actually, let me back up and let me ask you a different question first. You are probably one of the most innately curious people I know, which is saying a lot because I know a lot of very curious people, but the level to which you're always, every time I talk to you, I fully expect you're going to be reading like 10 different books about 10 different ideas, and you always have some new rabbit hole that you're going down.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that do you think is nature versus nurture? Because you've talked a lot about how the school system was really stifling for you. You've talked a lot about how your parents encouraged your curiosities. They facilitated them. They did a great job of it. But how much of it, your ability to hold on to this curiosity, which is a rare thing for people to go through the system from kindergarten all the way through college and still have it at the level that you do. How much of that do you think is just like biologically wired in you versus the nurture circumstances that you found yourself in?
Yeah, I mean, I would think of it like potential energy and kinetic energy.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot of potential energy towards curiosity naturally, but there have been certain things in my life that have made that kinetic, that have sort of activated that. And I think that there's people who can have less, but then have had maybe more kinetic energy. So then they are more curious, or people who have a lot of potential energy, but they don't have those kinetic forces that allow them to manifest it. And, you almost just make up an apocryphal story of somebody who, the mathematician Ramanujan.
Mm-hmm.
So Indian mathematician, and his parents didn't really understand what he was doing. He flunked out of school. He's living in India. He's like this genius mathematician, like genius. And one thing that's interesting about him is it seems like he didn't really rationalize his way towards mathematical insights. They were almost like delivered to him from the spirit world in this very like dreamlike intuitive place, which is crazy to follow that rabbit hole. But what happened was he was stuck and he's like, I need to get out of here. I need to make something myself. I want to get my work published. And if I remember correctly, he writes a letter to another mathematician named G.H. Hardy. And Hardy is at Cambridge, and he's like, gets Ramanujan to England to go study at Cambridge. And then he ends up dying at like 29 or 31, like very young. But had he not been at Cambridge, a lot of that potential energy would not have become kinetic. And I think it's very similar in terms of curiosity. And so I think that for whatever reason, I think my parents were very good about fostering curiosity. If I ever had I was just told growing up constantly, if you are passionate about something, that is worth pursuing. And it's funny, I was told at home that, and then at school, I was told to basically follow the rules, do what's expected of you, wait your turn. And I think that what has been so wondrous about the internet is that if you are curious, it's just infinite. I mean, it's the greatest thing ever. The hard part is just avoiding distractions, staying focused, and, not falling down the rabbit hole of TikTok. And then now these like crazy fight videos on Twitter, which constantly show up of like people fight. It's like just trying to avoid that stuff, which is like actual work.
Mm-hmm. So what were those catalyzing moments that turned the potential energy into kinetic for you? Are there specific things that you remember that catalyzed it for you?
Yeah. So in 6th grade, we had a project called the iSearch, and my teacher was Miss Peterson. And I remember I wasn't a particularly good student, and I wasn't much of a writer at all. And the project was you could write about whatever you wanted. And so I basically asked the question, how will the Boeing 787 airplane fly? Because that's what 6th graders do.
I remember you tweeting about this.
Yeah. And I got obsessed with it. And I think that there are a few things as I look back on that really had the underpinning of a lot of things that even we've spoken about.
Mm-hmm.
My dad and I flew up to Seattle to go to the Boeing factory. I'm now flying to Madeon concerts in New York, right? Like, go actually move your body to go be in the place where you're going to learn the most about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a big one. I think the other big one was just realizing that you could find really high quality information and just like look through it over and over and over again and just like say goodbye to the world and just dive deep into something. So there were a few magazines that I would just read, like Airports of the World, at the Jefferson Pilot's Manual, it's like 750 pages. I read it when I was in middle school, and I would really study the aerodynamics of flight. And then my dad knew somebody who was affiliated with Boeing, and she took us out to dinner, and I just got to ask her all these questions about how do aerodynamics work, how does lift work, what creates lift, what reduces lift, what creates drag, all those sorts of things. And I was like 11, 12 years old, and like just the idea that an 11 or 12-year-old could be asking these questions, like even now when I'm with kids, I just treat them like they're way older than other people do. Like I was with someone actually who's close to me, and he's like, "Why did you just ask my daughter that question? She's 3 years old." And I'm like, "Because she can do it." Like she's not like, so often we treat kids like they're these automatons who are like these subhuman creatures. Mm-hmm. And I think that's ridiculous. And I really enjoy, just having a conversation with kids and just asking, "Hey, what have you been learning recently?" And sometimes they'll surprise you. I was with a friend's daughter, 8 years old, a few weeks ago. And I just said, "Hey, what have you been learning recently that's been fun?" And she gave me some nonsense answer. I'm like, "You can do better than that." And, the babysitters there's like, "Wow, why are you saying that?" I'm like, "You can do better than that. Give me a really good answer. Like, really, what has been exciting to you recently?" And she goes, "Well, I was reading the Book of Kings, and I really like how there is King Solomon, and when God asks what he wants, he doesn't say that he wants material riches or wealth or like gold. He just wants a lot of wisdom." I was like, "That's a great answer. That is a great answer." And that's like that 8-year-old clarity of she just saw it and that's what she said. And I just think that we can just have kids doing more. And I think that expecting more from kids, not in the sort of classic parent, like, "You must get all A's. You must do exactly what I say. You must ace every single test. Otherwise, we won't like you." Like, that's not what this is about. It's just like really listening to them. What are they interested in? What are they being called to? How can I enable that? And then just letting them rise up, connecting them to adults. And it's such simple stuff, but we can just treat kids more like adults while still honoring their youthfulness. And I think if we do that, kids are happier, they can achieve more. And I think that that's what doing this iSearch really showed me. I was 11 and 12 years old when I was doing this, 6th grade.
That's amazing. And do you think that also is what activated your propensity for creativity too? Or were there other things that did that, or for creation?
I don't know. I think I just felt the need to do stuff, to make stuff, use my hands, get into it a lot. But for me, a lot of it was sports growing up. It was baseball, it was golf, it was soccer, it was basketball, getting obsessed with those. And, building little airports in my room. And I remember I went to Israel and we had a, I don't actually remember what the project was, but I remember spending a whole weekend building a clay model of Masada, which was, no, it wasn't Masada. It was a little area over by Haifa on the northwest side of Israel. I forget what the name was. Caesarea, that's what it was. I built a clay model of Caesarea. It's huge, probably 3 feet by 2 feet. It's like a big model. And I literally built the model of all the houses with the roads and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I built a lot of models growing up. I probably thought as a kid for a decent amount of time that I was just going to be a model maker. And I just did that, and I was just constantly encouraged and allowed to do that in a way that I'm just super grateful for. But that's what I want to do to other people. I want to just say, "Hey, get out and make something. And don't make the thing that you think you're supposed to make. Make the thing that you actually want to make." And that is actually really hard for people.
It's really hard for people because nobody ever tells you that.
Yeah.
Like, I grew up homeschooled in a place that my parents constructed an environment where creativity was more than welcome. It was highly encouraged, even when it was really annoying. Like if I was rigging up some weird contraption on the stairs where I was like tying yarn and like weird things, like rig up a pulley system or something, and my parents had to like walk around it to get up the stairs, I was still allowed to do it.
Yeah.
Because my creativity, the development of my creativity, me and my sister both, was just more important to my parents than the convenience of being able to walk up the stairs for a couple of hours while we were doing whatever we were doing. But most people don't. Like, you have this sort of mono environment where you're like, I remember I think I was like 6, and I went with my grandma to an event where they were doing, it was like I was hanging out with a bunch of other kids, and the teacher was having us all like do I remember we all got the same worksheet or the same like coloring page, and we were instructed like what colors to use where, how to fill in the coloring sheet, and there's like a correct way to be creative that is not creative at all. It's just checking off a bunch of boxes on a to-do list. But most people they spend 12, 14, 16 years thinking that that's what being creative is. So you saying to someone, no, write about what you want to write about. There isn't a formula for this. We're going to give you some guardrails, but break those if you want to do this in the way that's truer for you. Most people have never heard that before. It's a strangely radical statement to make.
Yeah. I mean, you have to know when to follow rules. And there's 2 ways that you can falter. The first is, and rules, and not just rules, but methods. Like, there's a lot of people who are sort of anarchist about learning, and they're like, all methods are bad. Don't follow any method. That only worked for somebody else. That's dogma. And I don't think that that's true. There are people who have really thought through the best way to do something. And if they show you how to do it, you will improve way faster. I mean, I noticed this with my boxing coach. Like, when we're up and we're boxing, like, there are so many things that I'm doing wrong, and he will point them out to me. And, if I'm there, like, my instincts are totally wrong. I'll turn away rather than just conserve energy and deflect the punch. There's so many things. And then he'll like throw a punch really fast. I'll be like, okay, whoa, I really need to wake up and really listen to you, because you know what you're doing. And yeah, in a fight, my instincts are not what the best technique is. Like, technique in that way is good. At the same time, it's important not to be so tied to technique that you become constrained. I was talking to a friend at Columbia, and he was talking about the mathematicians that he knew there, math and computer science people. And he said most of the very good computer scientists, mathematicians, they're very classically trained, obsessed with technique. The best one, they're pulling from some other place. They had a way of going on their own that where they would really insert their individuality into what they were doing. And you see this in classical music all the time, right? How many classical musicians just follow technique perfectly, but they don't know how to have that sort of that riff, that vibe, right? Sort of like a jazz musician. And then sort of on the other side, you have someone like Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin's like, he's got his long beard, his white hair, wearing no shoes. He's like, yeah, I know nothing about music. I know nothing about music. I just trust my taste. I just trust my taste. And a lot of the very best people in any domain, they transcend technique. I see this in golf. Like, a lot of players on the PGA Tour are obsessed with their swing. Like, the mechanics, making sure they have perfect form, they're hitting all the angles, the tempo, the technique, what is like the kinematic sequencing of how their hips move to their shoulders, to their arms, to the club. But almost none of the best players are like that. The best players in the world have their own thing that they're doing. And yeah, they're conscious of that, but they've found a way to take technique and then transcend it and become individuals.
How do you think about encouraging people to find that? Is it just a matter of encouraging them to try, giving them a place where they feel safe to explore? Because for a lot of people, that's a really hard thing to step into. You can invite them, but it feels so counterintuitive, especially if you have years of conditioning to the opposite.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, that's why, I think about it with, what we've built to Rite of Passage. You need friends who will support you rather than belittle your strange interests and obsessions. You need a word of encouragement from somebody who you admire, somebody who you trust. You got to be in an environment where what's expected of you is directionally towards curiosity, towards production, towards whatever outcome you're going for. I think these social dynamics really, really, really matter. And I think rite of passage is really an answer to that question. That if you can get people into the experience they go through, a rite of passage, and they have this deep internal shift.
I know you spent a lot of time thinking about K-12 education too, especially in designing your writing course for teens. If you could go in and change, if you could like wave a magic wand and be like, okay, like education is now as it should be, the education landscape, the options that parents have, the different types of schools that exist, the way that they run, what would you like to see? What is the future that you want to be building towards?
Yeah, for K-12, I think that what you want to have is basically just a mix of, you want to have the teaching be way more digital in terms of like, I've just seen the data on what really good app-based education can look like. I know you've seen this too, and it's pretty incredible how much faster kids can learn. I mean, it's unbelievable. And then you want to basically humanize it with coaches and mentors who really understand the kids, get to know them, and can help them motivationally, can help them emotionally, and can help them work through things when they really get stuck. But I think that right now, and then also set a culture. Setting a culture is really important. But right now, you just have these models that are super human labor intensive. They don't take advantage of any learning science whatsoever. And we might as well be stuck in the dark ages when it comes to education. I mean, we have a school system that is extremely conservative and, dare I say, hostile to new ideas. And, it's funny, if you look at a place, even like Stanford Business or Stanford School of Education, right? There are so many papers that they're coming out with where they're learning, a lot of the things that we've figured out about, or a lot of the ways that we teach, we figured out don't actually work that well. And even at the top, most elite schools in the world, like that stuff isn't being implemented. And I think there's such an opportunity for even education researchers right now, education writers, professors, learning experience designers to just look at the data, take it seriously, look at the research papers, and then take it from a place where it's not so dry, color it up, actually make it interesting to read and compelling, storyify it, add great examples that have life, and then actually implement what we've learned. Like it's really not rocket science. Like we have figured out so much about education in terms of how it can actually work, and we just haven't applied it. And then, a bunch of people are worried about the human element. Oh, we're going to be learning on apps. And that is a totally fair concern, Great. So let's have coaches. Let's have teachers who aren't delivering the material, but they're helping, and they're really doing a good job of setting the culture. And because we can learn just as much in half the time or a third as much time, we can take that extra time. We have kids playing sports, kids working on projects they're really excited about. And we can actually have more human to human experience. I'm telling you, human experience is like sitting in a lecture, just listening to a teacher drone on and on and on and on. That is not human interaction. And we just have to implement this.
This has been a really fun conversation. Thank you so much for hosting this here. Thank you so much for taking the time. This has been really great.
Thanks for hosting me.